chosen one. At some point, you begin noticing a strange pattern that feels difficult to explain at first. People seem to be watching you. Not openly, not directly, but quietly. You see the same names appearing on every story you post. They never like, never comment, never speak, but they never miss anything either. Sometimes you hear through mutual friends that someone has been asking questions about you, where you work now, what you were doing lately, whether you were still single, whether you moved forward in life. Other times you notice something more subtle. Someone begins adopting the same routines you talk about, using the same phrases you use, even copying the way you present yourself online or in public. And occasionally you encounter them in places where their presence feels strangely coincidental, as if your movements are somehow being quietly tracked. When these moments happen repeatedly, it can feel unsettling. Your first instinct may be to wonder if something is wrong, or if you somehow invited unwanted attention without realizing it. But in many cases, this phenomenon has a simpler explanation. Human beings naturally watch what captures their attention, and attention follows impact. When someone begins growing, evolving, or living in a way that stands out from the environment around them, they become a reference point in other people's minds. Some individuals watch because they admire what they see, but do not yet have the courage to approach directly. Others watch because your life creates a comparison they cannot stop measuring themselves against. And some watch because your progress quietly challenges the narrative they once believed about you. Silent monitoring therefore appears not because you asked for attention, but because your life has become interesting enough that people feel compelled to observe it. The modern world has made this phenomenon even more common. Social media allows people to stay informed about someone's life without participating in it. A person can follow your progress from a distance without ever speaking to you. They can watch your successes, your changes, your ideas, and your routines, while remaining completely invisible in your daily reality. This creates a new type of relationship dynamic that did not exist in previous generations. People can remain emotionally invested in your life while staying socially distant from you. They may know more about your current direction than acquaintances who actually talk to you regularly. And because this observation happens silently, it can feel mysterious when you begin noticing it. But silent monitoring is rarely random. People watch what they do not fully understand, what they secretly admire, what they envy, or what they fear losing control over. When someone sees you becoming stronger, calmer, more disciplined, or more successful than they expected, curiosity naturally follows. They want to know how you changed. They want to see whether your progress continues or eventually fades. They want to measure their own life against the trajectory they see unfolding in yours. Observation becomes their way of answering questions they are not willing to ask out loud. It is important to understand that being watched does not automatically mean someone intends harm. Many watchers are simply curious observers who feel unsure how to interact with someone whose path seems different from their own. They may admire your discipline, but feel too intimidated to say so. They may respect your progress, but worry that approaching you would reveal how stagnant their own life feels in comparison. Watching from a distance feels safer than initiating a conversation that might expose their insecurity. At the same time, silent observation can also come from more complicated emotions. People who once had access to your life may continue watching because they want to know if you still need them. People who underestimated you may monitor your progress because your growth challenges the assumptions they once made. People who lost connection with you may check your updates because they wonder whether they missed an opportunity they did not recognize at the time. In all these situations, watching becomes a way to stay connected to your story without re-entering your life directly. The key insight for a chosen one is recognizing that observation often follows influence. People do not quietly track the lives of individuals who leave no impression on them. They watch the ones who create questions in their mind. They watch the ones who represent possibilities they have not yet embraced themselves. And sometimes, they watch because your consistency forces them to reconsider what they once believed about you. Chosen one. The silent monitoring phenomenon is less about surveillance and more about significance. When people keep watching your moves, your growth, and your progress from the background, it usually means your life has become a reference point in their mind. They are studying something they cannot easily categorize, and until they understand it, or until they find the courage to approach it, they will continue observing quietly from a distance. Chosen one. Once you begin recognizing that silent observation is real, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why are they watching in the first place? Human attention rarely lingers without reason. People may scroll past hundreds of images and updates throughout the day, but the accounts they consistently check, the names they repeatedly notice, and the lives they quietly track usually carry some deeper meaning in their mind. When someone continues observing you without interacting, the motivation behind that behavior typically falls into a few clear psychological patterns.
The first and most common reason is curiosity without courage. Many people are curious about the lives of others, especially when those lives seem to evolve in unexpected ways. Perhaps you changed your career path, improved your discipline, developed a stronger presence, or simply grew beyond the version of yourself they once knew. That transformation creates curiosity. They want to know how you changed and what direction you are heading. Yet, curiosity alone does not always produce conversation. Speaking directly requires vulnerability. It requires admitting interest, admiration, or even confusion about how someone else is moving forward in life. For many individuals, watching from a distance feels safer than opening that door. Silent observation allows them to collect information without exposing themselves emotionally. They can learn about your progress while protecting their own sense of pride or comfort. The second reason people watch quietly is comparison. Human beings measure themselves constantly, often without realizing it. When someone notices another person growing, succeeding, or evolving in ways they did not expect, an internal scoreboard begins forming. Your life becomes a point of reference against which they evaluate their own decisions, habits, and outcomes. They watch to see whether your progress continues or whether it slows down. They track your milestones to understand where they stand in relation to you. This comparison dynamic is especially common among people who once shared a similar environment with you. Former classmates, co-workers, old friends, or even distant relatives may feel particularly compelled to observe your progress because they remember a version of you that felt familiar and predictable. When that version changes, curiosity turns into measurement. Instead of competing with their own potential, they begin competing with your trajectory. And the easiest way to maintain that scoreboard is through observation. They monitor your posts, your achievements, and your visible progress to see how the comparison evolves over time. In this situation, watching becomes less about you and more about how they evaluate themselves. A third reason silent observation continues is unfinished emotional business. Sometimes people watch because your story still carries unresolved meaning in their life. Perhaps they were once close to you and walked away before fully understanding your value. Perhaps they underestimated your potential or dismissed your ambitions when you were still building quietly. When your life begins moving in directions they did not anticipate, curiosity returns with a different emotional tone. They want to know whether you succeeded despite the doubts they once had. They want to see whether you moved forward without them. And sometimes, they want to check whether you still carry emotional attachment that could reopen a connection. Watching becomes their way of gathering emotional information without risking rejection. If they see signs that you struggled or remained stuck, it might confirm the story they once told themselves. But if they see growth, discipline, and progress, the observation becomes more complicated because it challenges the narrative they used to justify their distance. This is why people who once had access to your life often remain among the most consistent, silent watchers. The relationship may have ended, but the curiosity about your direction remains unfinished. They want to know whether you changed, whether you improved, and whether the door they once closed might still exist somewhere in the background. At its core, silent monitoring almost always connects back to one simple question. Are you still accessible? Watching allows someone to measure that without directly asking. If you appear stable, confident, and independent, the answer may discourage them from approaching. If you appear uncertain or vulnerable, the answer may encourage them to reach out again. Observation becomes their way of testing emotional distance without risking immediate rejection. Chosen one. When you understand these motivations, silent watchers stop feeling mysterious. Curiosity draws some of them, comparison drives others, and unfinished emotional business keeps a few returning again and again to check your direction. In every case, observation reflects the impact your life has created in their mind. People do not repeatedly monitor lives that leave no impression on them. They watch the ones who raise questions they have not yet answered for themselves. Chosen one. Once you realize that silent monitoring happens for specific reasons, the next step is understanding that not every watcher carries the same intention. From a distance, they may appear identical, quiet observers who track your posts, notice your progress, and remain present without speaking. But behind that silence, the motivations can be very different. Some watch with admiration, others watch with regret. Some observe out of curiosity, while others study you more strategically. Learning to recognize these differences helps you avoid unnecessary paranoia while still protecting your energy. The first type is the admiring watcher. This person observes you because something about your life genuinely inspires them. They may admire your discipline, your creativity, your growth, or the way you carry yourself. But admiration does not always translate into conversation. Many people feel awkward approaching someone they respect because they worry their words will sound insincere or unnecessary. Instead of reaching out, they watch quietly and allow your example to motivate them privately. Admiring watchers rarely create conflict. They do not spread rumors, undermine your progress, or compete with you indirectly. Their observation remains respectful and distant. If you ever interact with them, their tone usually carries encouragement rather than comparison. The second type is the regret watcher. This individual once had closer access to your life, but lost that access through their own decisions. Perhaps they underestimated your potential, walked away too quickly, or allowed pride to prevent them from recognizing your value at the time. As your life begins evolving in ways they did not expect, curiosity grows stronger. They start checking your updates more frequently, looking for signs of how far you have come and whether the door they once closed might still exist. Regret watchers often appear suddenly after long periods of silence. They may reappear through small interactions, a message reacting to an old photo, a comment on something minor, or a casual greeting that seems unrelated to the past. But behind that small interaction is usually a deeper question. Did they misjudge you? And is there still space to reconnect? The third type is the jealous watcher. This is the observer whose attention comes from discomfort rather than admiration. Your progress triggers comparison in their mind, and instead of feeling motivated, they feel threatened. They watch because they cannot ignore the difference between your direction and their own. But their attention rarely appears supportive. Jealous watchers often communicate indirectly through mutual connections. They might minimize your achievements when speaking to others, or frame your progress as luck rather than effort. At the same time, they continue monitoring everything you do. This contradiction reveals the tension they feel internally. They do not want to celebrate your growth, yet they cannot stop paying attention to it. The fourth type is the copycat watcher. Unlike the jealous observer who resents your progress, the copycat studies it carefully. They pay attention to the details of what you do, how you present yourself, the ideas you share, and the routines you talk about. Over time, you may notice similarities appearing. Phrases you once used begin appearing in their posts. Strategies you discussed begin appearing in their projects. Even the tone of their communication may begin mirroring yours. Copycat watchers rarely admit the influence openly, because doing so would require acknowledging the source. Instead, they quietly adopt pieces of what they observe and attempt to integrate those elements into their own life. The fifth type is the control watcher. This observer pays attention not out of admiration or inspiration, but because they want to predict your behavior. In some cases, this person once held influence over your decisions, your emotions, or your direction. When that influence disappears, they continue watching in order to understand your next move. They want to know what you are planning, where you are going, and how your life is evolving without their involvement. Control watchers often ask questions that feel less like curiosity and more like investigation. They may test your boundaries or push for explanations about your choices. Their observation is less about appreciation and more about maintaining a sense of psychological control over a situation that no longer belongs to them. Chosen one. The important lesson here is recognizing that watching does not equal supporting. Some observers respect you, some regret losing you, some compare themselves against you. Others study you for their own advantage. Understanding these differences helps you respond with discernment rather than assumption. Silent watchers may all look the same from the outside, but the intentions behind that silence can be very different. Chosen one. Once you become aware that people may be quietly observing your life, the next challenge is deciding how to respond. Many people make one of two mistakes when they notice silent watchers. The first mistake is overreacting. They begin assuming every view, every coincidence, or every unfamiliar presence is part of some larger scheme. Their focus shifts from living their life to constantly analyzing who might be watching and why. This reaction drains energy and creates unnecessary anxiety. The second mistake is ignoring the pattern entirely and continuing to share every detail of their life openly, as if observation has no impact at all. Both extremes create problems. The chosen one response is something different. Calm awareness combined with strategic privacy. You acknowledge that observation exists, but you do not allow it to dominate your attention. Your focus remains on building your life rather than performing it for spectators. One of the most important principles in handling silent monitoring is avoiding public confrontation unless there is clear evidence of harm. When people feel watched, the instinct to call it out directly can be strong. But public confrontation often produces exactly the reaction silent watchers want: attention. Once the situation becomes public drama, the focus shifts away from your progress and toward the conflict itself. The observers become participants, and the narrative begins revolving around reaction instead of direction. Remaining composed protects you from falling into that trap. Calmness communicates confidence in your path, while unnecessary confrontation signals that the watchers successfully disrupted your focus. Another key response is reducing the amount of real-time information you share. In the modern world, many people document their lives as events unfold. They post locations immediately, share plans before they happen, and reveal goals before those goals are complete. While openness can create connection, it can also create unnecessary visibility for individuals who are quietly studying your movements. Strategic privacy simply means adjusting the timing and amount of information you release. Instead of announcing every step as it happens, you may share results after the process is already finished. Instead of broadcasting every idea in its early stages, you may allow it to develop privately before presenting it publicly. This shift does not require secrecy or fear. It simply restores control over the narrative of your life. Another powerful response is strengthening the circle of trust around you. Silent monitoring often becomes easier when too many people have access to your plans, your goals, or your personal struggles. Information travels quickly when it passes through multiple layers of acquaintances. Tightening your circle means being more intentional about who receives direct insight into your life. Not everyone who is friendly deserves access to your strategy. Some people are supportive, while others are simply curious. Discernment helps you distinguish between the two. The fewer unnecessary channels your information travels through, the less opportunity silent observers have to collect details indirectly. At the same time, protecting your energy does not require paranoia. Not every watcher carries harmful intentions. Some people simply observe because they admire your growth. Others remain curious about how your story unfolds. The goal is not to assume the worst about everyone who pays attention to your life. The goal is to move with awareness while staying focused on your purpose. Overthinking the motives of every observer only distracts you from the work that created their attention in the first place. Boundaries also play an important role in this process. When someone begins testing those boundaries through intrusive questions or subtle pressure to reveal more than you want to share, your response should remain simple and calm. You do not owe detailed explanations of your decisions to people who are not part of your inner circle. Short, respectful answers create clarity without opening unnecessary doors.
Over time, people learn how much access they truly have, based on how consistently you maintain those boundaries. The final part of the chosen one response is watching how others react when boundaries appear. Boundaries often reveal character more clearly than conversation ever could. Supportive people respect your privacy without resistance. Curious but respectful observers simply continue watching quietly. But individuals who expected unlimited access often react with frustration or criticism when that access changes. Their reaction exposes their expectations. In this way, boundaries act as a filter. They separate those who genuinely respect your path from those who are simply interested in controlling it. Chosen one. Protecting your energy does not require fear or suspicion. It requires awareness and discipline. By staying calm, sharing information strategically, strengthening your circle, and maintaining clear boundaries, you keep control of your direction without becoming distracted by who might be watching. Your life continues moving forward, while the observers remain exactly where they have always been, watching from a distance. Chosen one. When you step back and look at the silent monitoring phenomenon from a wider perspective, the meaning behind it begins to change. At first, noticing that people quietly watch your life can feel strange or even uncomfortable. You may wonder why certain individuals track your progress so consistently without speaking directly. But over time, clarity emerges. Human attention is rarely random. People watch what affects them internally. They watch what creates questions in their mind. And most importantly, they watch what becomes a reference point in their personal understanding of success, growth, and direction. When someone repeatedly observes your life from a distance, it often means your path has become a landmark in their thinking. Something about your journey captured their awareness, and now they use that awareness to measure their own life against it. A reference point is something people use to orient themselves. In a physical landscape, landmarks help travelers understand where they are and where they might go next. In the same way, certain individuals become psychological landmarks in the lives of others. When someone grows beyond expectations, transforms their habits, or moves in a direction that challenges old assumptions, the people who once knew them begin recalibrating their understanding of what is possible. They may not admit it directly, but your life becomes a silent comparison point.
They watch to see whether the progress continues. They watch to see whether the transformation holds. They watch to understand whether the discipline they see in you produces results they cannot ignore. Observation becomes their way of studying something that quietly disrupts the story they once believed. Consistency is usually what turns someone into that reference point. A single success or temporary change rarely attracts long-term attention. Many people achieve small victories that disappear just as quickly as they arrived. But steady growth creates a different impression. When observers see someone remain disciplined, focused, and calm over time, curiosity deepens. They start wondering what drives that consistency. They want to know whether the stability they see is real or simply temporary momentum. This curiosity often grows stronger when the observer once believed you would remain the same person they remembered in the past. When reality begins contradicting those old assumptions, attention follows naturally. The mind attempts to reconcile the difference between the old version of you and the one they see today. For some observers, this realization becomes inspiration. They watch quietly, because your progress motivates them to reflect on their own choices. Your discipline encourages them to reconsider habits they once ignored. Your calmness under pressure makes them question why they react differently in similar situations. In this case, silent observation is not hostile. It is reflective. The person may never approach you directly, but your life becomes a reminder that change is possible. Your example quietly influences them, even if the connection remains distant. In many ways, these observers benefit the most from watching, because they allow your progress to spark growth within themselves. Other observers experience a different reaction. Instead of inspiration, they feel comparison. Human beings often measure themselves against the people they once considered equal or familiar. When someone from their past begins moving forward in unexpected ways, the mind automatically begins evaluating distance. They compare careers, habits, discipline, relationships, or achievements. Watching becomes a way of tracking that distance. They want to see whether you continue advancing or eventually slow down. This comparison is not always negative, but it can create internal tension if they feel their own progress has stalled. The more consistent your growth appears, the harder it becomes for them to ignore the difference. There are also observers whose attention comes from unresolved emotion. These individuals once had access to your life, but no longer do. Perhaps they walked away when your direction was unclear. Perhaps they underestimated your potential. Perhaps circumstances separated you before your transformation became visible. Now that your life reflects stability or progress they did not expect, curiosity returns. They watch to see whether the version of you they once knew still exists, or whether you have become someone entirely different.
Silent observation becomes their way of answering a question they are not ready to ask directly. Did they misunderstand who you were becoming? From a spiritual perspective, observation often appears when someone begins walking in alignment with their purpose. Alignment carries a different energy than chaos or distraction. It creates clarity, focus, and discipline that become visible even from a distance. People who encounter that energy sometimes feel drawn to it without fully understanding why. They watch because they sense something distinct in the way you move through life. They notice that your decisions appear guided by a level of stability or protection they cannot easily explain. For some, this presence becomes comforting. For others, it becomes unsettling because it highlights areas where their own life lacks direction. In both cases, your alignment creates awareness in those who observe it. The important lesson for a chosen one is recognizing that observation does not equal entitlement. Just because people watch your life does not mean they deserve access to every part of it. Attention does not create permission. Your story remains yours to share in the way you choose. Maintaining privacy is not secrecy or arrogance. It is discipline. When you move quietly and allow results to appear without constant explanation,
Your life speaks through evidence rather than performance. This approach protects your energy while also preventing unnecessary interference from those who are only observing out of curiosity or comparison. Moving quietly also changes the quality of attention you receive. When someone constantly broadcasts every plan, idea, or ambition, the audience often becomes more focused on the announcement than the outcome. But when results appear without excessive explanation, the impact becomes stronger. Observers cannot dismiss what they see because the evidence exists without debate. Your actions become the narrative rather than your words.
In time, this quiet consistency builds a reputation that speaks louder than any attempt to prove yourself. Chosen one. Being watched does not mean you need to change the way you live. It simply means your life has become meaningful enough to influence the thinking of others. Whether that influence appears as admiration, comparison, curiosity, or reflection, the attention itself reveals that your journey created an impression. The observers may remain silent, but their attention confirms that your direction matters. And while they continue watching from a distance, your responsibility remains simple. Keep moving forward, remain consistent, and let your life continue speaking in ways that require no explanation at all. If this message resonated with you, remember this: being watched is not a threat. It's often a sign your life carries impact. Move quietly, protect your next steps, and let results speak louder than attention. Comment private if you're protecting your next season, and subscribe for more Chosen One insights on discernment and elevation.